Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very exciting session at LitFestx with Jeff Koehler. Jeff Koehler, he's joining us from Barcelona, Spain. He's a writer, traveler, author of several books, and a chef, a cook, and he writes extensively on food and culture, including Spain, recipes and traditions. He was named one of the 2013's top cookbooks by the New York Times. Uh, his other book, Morocco, A Culinary Journey with Recipes and La Paella, deliciously authentic rice dishes from Spain's Mediterranean coast. His work has appeared in Savia, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Food and Wine, NPR.org, The Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Afar, Tin House. Oh my God, the list keeps on and on. And Best Food Writing in 2010 as well. Um, Jeff's latest book is on Darjeeling, the about the world's greatest tea, and it's not just about tea, of course. He's also, written about the tea industry and plantations and life there. Jeff, it's nice that we have you on this session because India is foremost a country of tea drinkers, and I don't consume tea, but practically everyone I know drinks maybe 6, 8, 10, or 12 cups a day, uh, and I'm sure people are excited about knowing a lot of the history, a lot of certainly the geography, a lot of the nuances about Darjeeling and about Darjeeling tea. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, the tea? Why did you sort of choose to write about this subject?
Well, the tea, especially in India, is far more than a drink, and is a great way to tell a story, quite a big story. And there's details from the history. The land is just really an in-depth look at the tea industry in India, and the history. Everything kind of comes together in this beautiful cup of tea. And it's basically it's a very detailed look, kind of deep. Looking so many elements coming into it, from the natural elements to the historic elements to tea simply as a cultural drink. Darjeeling, to start with, it's the world's greatest tea. There's no question. It's the champagne of tea. It's famous for being, fruity and aromatic, and the colors, they often compare it to kind of metallic tones. It's really bright. It's known as single estate and kind of unblended. And this tea is only about 8 million kilos a year that's being produced in Darjeeling. Well, India is producing about 1 billion kilos of tea a year. So less than 1% of India's tea is coming from this part of India, kind of jammed like a thumb way up in the northeast in the Himalaya. But there's 1% of tea, though. This 8 million kilos is absolutely the jewel in India's tea producing crown. Now, of course, India is really diverse geography, and that means that it produces various types of teas. But Darjeeling tea is very unique for many different reasons, except as it is up in the Himalaya. But this is a absolute fascinating industry. Tea is not originally from there. So part of the book is a big part of the book is telling the story of how it got there and why it's there. And that, of course, is a big relation to the Raj and to the Opium Wars of China and to many, many other things. India, of course, developed its own tea industry in Assam, the biggest producing area, and lots of quantity. But Darjeeling was always about quality. It was never about numbers. And it's about being a high quality tea. It's very different. It's self-drinking. if you compare it to, for instance, to chai or something, I mean, it has poise over bounce. It's patient as opposed, it has patience, I should say, as opposed to velocity. It's soft-spoken. It's kind of simplicity as opposed to this kind of Baroque flamboyance you get in a good chai. You drink it with no milk, no sugar, not even lemon, because it has a real slight briskness to it. It's a whole different type of tea, in a sense, that many people in India are used to drinking, and it definitely stands out. But again, it's always been about kind of the quality of there and the industry, and it's the most expensive teas, of course, coming from there.
So, in your book also you talk a lot about the tea estates.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about life in a tea estate, or tea plantation in Darjeeling. What was your sense, and what was your experience of the whole thing?
To start with, there's only 87 tea estates in Darjeeling. It's a very limited number. The average estate only has about 225 hectares of tea, not that big, producing about 100,000 kilos of tea on average, a little bit less. And they have approximately 800 full-time workers. Now, the workers live on the estate. And what this means is that the estates actually have about anywhere from 5, 6 to 10,000 people living on the estate itself. So one of the things that really struck me when the first time I was up there was how many people that 100,000 kilos of tea, which is not that much really, how many people that's supporting. Now, what happened was when the industry was developed, because of course when they started planting the tea, they built these plantations, they had to bring in workers to work on them. Well, it was very rural. And so they built small villages on the estates themselves, and they pay a certain daily wage, plus have to give rice and flour, and they have to give other things as well. Because in the early days, it was very difficult to get, and that tradition continues today. It's kind of an archaic system, how the estates kind of work. But life on the estate is exactly the very rule. Often the estates touch each other, but maybe going from one state to the next one will take you an hour or two in a Jeep today. These roads, there's 7 valleys around Darjeeling where the estates are all set up. I said they're not really that big, but it's absolutely gorgeous, stunning land. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the look. You have these kind of rolling hills carpeted with these kind of waist-high tea shrubs, and of course the Himalayas, Kanchenjunga, and just kind of hovering over Darjeeling like a sail. It's stunning, and of course that geography, that terroir of the estates, is what's contributing much to the original and the uniqueness of the tea itself. The soil, the steepness of the land, the rain, a lot of fog. So it's the tea leaves aren't getting direct sunlight too many hours a day. There's a real crispness that blows up over the Himalaya onto the bushes, especially in the autumn. Gives that real kind of crisping effect. The buds in this high elevation, they grow really slow, concentrating the flavors of the teas. And what you see in the gardens is you're always walking up or down. There's nothing flat. I mean, Darjeeling, there's no flat space. And so even on the tea estates, what you see is that the bottom of the estate, the teas are quite a bit different even than the ones at the top of the estate, whereas you'll have the first flush or the early harvest will be, starting at the top, but below it, they'll already be into the second flush, maybe moving into it. It's really a lot of microclimates and diversity coming just from estate to estate.
So let me just hold you there for a second. I've often heard this term first flush. So what is the meaning of the term flush, with respect to tea?
Yeah, well, flush, I mean, the way that my book is broken up, it is into the 4 flushes, and flush is essentially a harvesting period. Now, I wanted to put, one of the ideas originally for the title of the book was kind of like the world's greatest tea and in 4 flushes, and that was of course nixed by my marketing department that you can have that in the title. But a flush is a very, very important element in Darjeeling tea, very specifically, because Darjeeling tea is not just tea all year round. They're not harvesting it. They're harvesting it from essentially late February, early March to mid-November. And in this time period, the bushes are being plucked, or they're taking just the 2 leaves and the terminal bud off the bush about every 7 to 8 days. And in the course of those months, you have this kind of daisy chain of 4 flushes. There's no real cutoff from one day to the next. It's just this gradual shifting of the type of leaf and the weather. So the first flush is a spring flush. So the bushes are in hibernation in wintertime. You have your first rains, and then you start your first flush, where the leaves start flushing out. First flush, again, late February or so it starts. The tea it makes, so the leaves are really bright green, real springy tea. It's light and bright and a little bit brisk. It's a lovely, lovely green tea. Then as the weather gets warmer, in May and June, you get the second flush. And the flavors are more rounded, more concentrated, where the first flush teas in the cup are a yellowish golden, kind of greenish tone. At the second flush become a little deeper, you get lovely kind of bronzy colors. And this tea has a lot of the muscatel flavor. And the muscatel is the most famous flavor of Darjeeling tea. This is kind of a spicy hint with a slight sweetness to it. But this is the muscatel flush. So all the famous elements of Darjeeling tea are kind of accentuated in second flush. And these are the big money teas generally. First flush teas create a lot of excitement in Europe especially, and in the Indian tea industry for sure, because it's the new teas. But the second flush is, many people consider, better. It's more refined. It's deeper. Then you get the monsoon flush in July, August, September with the rains. The rains nonstop, nearly up there. And the teas, they flush like crazy. They have to be plucked continually. So the leaves are coming like mad. And this is about quantity, not quality. Okay, so half the teas of the year maybe are being monsoon flush, but these teas, it's very difficult in the processing of them to make very high quality teas because of the incredible humidity, for instance. So you get this massive bulk of teas, but those tend to be for blends. And then you have the autumn flush, this last hurrah from the bushes. The bushes are giving their last kind of go before they go back into hibernation. So you're looking October, November. It's very short sometimes. This lovely, lovely autumn flush, very complex flavors, ruddy in the cup, a real kind of sparkle to it. And there's a delicious irony, especially for Indian consumers, that this flush you essentially cannot find outside of India, because by the time it's ready, European merchants who are buying the majority of Darjeeling teas, they're busy with Christmas. Or North American consumers, they're busy with Christmas. So this doesn't mean it's a cheap flush, but it means that this one is definitely much more available to an Indian consumer than it is to me here in Spain. I can't find it. As I said, my tea stores are thinking about something else. So there's this lovely, lovely irony involved here that, and even I think that in many years the highest priced tea at the auction house is autumn flush. Part of that has to do with, I think, the fact that it's like the last flush of the year and people kind of get a bit crazy in the last days of the auction. But it's for people who really know teas, and this is very specific to the industry in India, they like the autumn flush. This is a really, really good tea.
So which is your favorite flush, Jeff?
After all of the explanation about autumn flush, I really like spring flush, maybe because although I've been in Darjeeling before, when I was working on the book, I followed the whole processing year. I was able to be in all 4 flushes. And so my first time to really immerse myself in the Darjeeling tea industry and be on some weeks on the estate was in the first flush. And absolutely that spring tea is so light and so lovely on the palate that this, I think, part of it is the flavor for me, but also part is my association of just absolutely, I said, I've been in Darjeeling before, but I really, really fell hard for it that spring when I was able to just, spend quite a bit of time on the estates. In the springtime, it was really lovely. We had lovely days. It's so green. and there's that fresh greenness everywhere. I mean, it's a spring tea, and it's basically it's springtime in a cup.
Wow. You've just made me think hard about not drinking tea. I maybe should try the spring flush with you sometime, Jeff.
I will convert you when I'm there next month. We'll have a tea, and I will convert you to a tea drinker. Believe me.
So tell me, do you use tea in some specific way in your recipes or in your cooking? Is there something special that you're doing with tea?
Well, I found really interesting to see tea being used as an ingredient. We had some really a couple of places people using tea leaves in salads for that texture. No, I mean, wow. For me, tea is, and in one place they were actually making almost kind of a tempura tea leaf, fresh tea leaf. They kind of fry up as a little appetizer at dinner. This is fantastic. This, of course, is you have to be in Darjeeling to be able to make, but it's great. No, what I really, tea just goes with about everything. Darjeeling tea, though, one has to be a little bit careful because it's the flavors are so mild and so nuanced and soft that you have to really be careful that you don't kill that Darjeeling taste with really spicy foods. So when, for instance, chai for me, a good chai masala, a good masala chai goes perfect with many things. I love it. Other things, I like that softness of Darjeeling tea. Darjeeling tea, you can kind of drink all day long, actually. You can really kind of sip it. It doesn't kind of overwhelm the palate, so to speak, especially the first and second flush teas. You can just, when I'm not traveling, I'm home at my desk and I make, endless cups of tea. Often 3/4 go cold and I make a new cup. It's part of the whole ritual of making the cup because there's something really interesting and fascinating about tea because you add the tea leaves, and as soon as you add the water over the leaves, it just begins to react, interact, and it just changes. Of course, making a cup of Darjeeling tea, though, is very simple, very straightforward, but precise, because it needs to be 1 teaspoon of loose leaf Darjeeling tea. The water not too hot. You don't want to bring out too much bitterness. So 90 degrees Celsius, maybe 95 Celsius, just before the boil. 3 minutes steeping, no more. You don't want a real dark. You want to be able to pull out all those wonderful fruity and floral flavors. I mean, I say floral, but I mean more stem than petal in that floral sense. And it's very simple, and it's really interesting when you see the first flush, the second flush, different flushes. They're very different in the cup, different colors. And you can see in my book, there's a great photo of, I was in Gumti and the same garden, the same tea, just a couple different flushes all side by side, and you see the colors going from that yellowish greenish color right through the bronzes and the coppers to a ruddy, almost crimson color by the autumn flush. It's absolutely fascinating to see on the estate or in the cup how the weather changes, the leaves change, everything change, and you're just there literally week to week, slightly changing.
Wow. Jeff, you've just taken us on this fantastic journey, I must say, on how to prepare the perfect cup of tea. I honestly didn't realize that there was so much into it, and it was so nuanced. I remember, somewhere in the book you mentioned about the quantum of shoots that go into a kilo of Darjeeling tea. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, the Darjeeling tea is not. It can never be automated. It's selectively hand plucked, and they're only taking the classic Darjeeling pluck, I should say, is only the last 2 leaves and the terminal bud. Okay, and they twist it. They don't cut it. They twist it. The pluckers are all women. They work with both hands. You take it and you twist it. But it takes 22,000 of these plucks, 22,000, to make a single kilo of Darjeeling tea. Extremely laborious. And but there's no way to automate it. One, Darjeeling tea, as I said earlier, is only about quality. Second, they can't automate it because no machine can selectively pluck. But also, it's so steep that the hills that it's impossible to bring in machinery in. So you have, it's very manual, and not only manual in plucking, but every stage of the process of making tea. They can only really tell, so they wither it overnight. So it sits overnight, loses, a third of its moisture, and then it's rolled, and then it's kind of oxidized or fermented on these beds. And telling step to step is only about feeling it. It's about touch. It's about the smell. When they oxidize or they ferment the tea, the very last step, and it has that brown, that classic aromas and color of tea. The people in charge are smelling it. They're taking it every 5 minutes, and they say, okay, the flavor is at its peak now, and it goes off to the oven and it's fired. There's no way you can ever mechanize that. So from the very beginning to the very end, it's absolutely an artisanal, hands-on process that you'll never be able to automate it, but it's something that it goes back generations. People working on these estates, there are many generations of families doing the same type of work. It's passed on when the tea industry started in the 19th century, and it has changed in many respects very little in the last century or so.
Wow. Jeff, we are getting a series of questions from online audiences. Shall we get into maybe a couple of them? We've got some time. Yeah. So the first question I'm seeing here is from Megha, and she says, Jeff, where did this love for tea, travel, and writing begin?
The love for tea came actually in Darjeeling. Well, when I finished university in the States, I went off to Africa for a year, and in 1 year became 4, and I spent 4 years backpacking around Africa and Asia, and I almost living on tea. I found this for me, milky, usually spicy, lots of sugar. And I was in India for one. I went to Darjeeling one winter, and it was the first time that I actually tasted tea for itself. So as I said, no milk, no lemon, no sugar, just tea. And this was an incredible moment. Thinking it was winter. It was just before Christmas. It was beautiful, cold and clear from Darjeeling. And I thought this is as fresh as these hills outside the city. And for me, it was a big thing because I'd been almost 2.5, 3 years at that point, having probably 12 cups of tea a day, but often, as I said, sweet and spicy and milky. And this was like, wow, and this is something for the Darjeeling specifically. From that point, this was in the mid-90s, I always wondered, how's it possible that the world's greatest, how is such amazing tea coming from here, and why? And this is what led to the book, actually. But so that's kind of part of an answer. The tea, though, I discovered for sure when I was on the road. I just found that also with people traveling, it goes hand in hand. You're traveling, you go into places, you stop for a cup of tea. That's where you meet. Everybody's having a cup of tea. You meet local people talking. I found that's probably where I spent 3/4 of my downtime were in cafes, drinking tea, across the world. And this is where I found the most interesting interaction was often over tea, and often or backgammon or whatever. But the tea and traveling for me kind of went hand in hand. Writing came later. As a way to kind of, in many respects, relive those moments. And for this book, it was a way that I can indulge my passion in Darjeeling and spend basically 2 years thinking of basically little else but Darjeeling on a big scale. So it's the writing has helped me travel also and keep drinking tea. So
interesting, very interesting, Jeff. We've got a request from somebody on Twitter who's saying, please share some interesting tea tales so we can take something back home with us.
Some interesting tea
tales, a story or
Well, I mean, for sure on the tea gardens, what you find is incredible passion of people on the tea estate and the people working in the factories that are making the tea. I mean, I don't know how many people I met. They continue to just amaze me in their abilities. I said everything is based on the hands or on the smell, and you watch these people be able to smell something and they're picking out. It's like wine tasting, but 10 times more complex. I mean, even tasting teas is much more complex than tasting wine, for instance. And some of the most incredible people I met, and the stories that I tended to get back were people-based, were some of the people tasting teas. I write in the book about one particular auctioneer in Kolkata who tasting thousands of teas every week. And you don't just take a sip and that's it. You're looking at the dry leaves, looking at the steeped leaves. You're tasting the tea when it's hot, and you have different flavors, and when it cools, you have and then basically on the estates they're tasting every single morning the teas they make that day, and so they're tasting these day by day by day, and you see this nuances of change, and they're adjusting their production methods to fit that slight change, because today is more humid or it's a bit warmer, so the tea needs to be fired a little bit hotter or something. These slight nuances. And I was just endlessly amazed at people you would meet. For instance, one gentleman I write about, very calm and very polite and very mellow. And then as soon as he would start tasting tea, he like transformed. He's just physical and banging the cups down and just slurping and spitting and the tea leaves right in his face, and it just transform. But it's a very physical thing about tasting tea, and this is a very important part of his job as a tea grower, as a manager in Darjeeling. And then when it was all done in half an hour, you go through this tea tasting, and you don't want to break the spell, because you have those impressions. So you tend to kind of taste a whole kind of row of teas, and he kind of comes out and he kind of snaps back into it, and he's back to his kind of calm, mellow self. This kind of, for me, is absolutely, this is one of my favorite things of working on the book, was being able to be in the tea factories. Factory is don't think it's a manufactory. This is a big barn, basically, with where they're doing the teas. This was something I loved, and I tried to do every day when I was there, was to be able to be there in the morning when they tasted those fired teas. They're literally just almost warm coming out of the oven. It's an absolutely incredible moment.
Jeff, sitting thousands of miles away, just interacting via this virtual, tool, I can still feel the passion you have and the love you have for, for tea and for Darjeeling. And this is just fantastic. I mean, your passion is infectious. And I, really hope that your book does really, really well. I'm sure it'll find good audiences and readers, both in India and with all the tea lovers abroad. And thank you so much for joining us for this LitFestx session and answering questions from, the online viewers. On a close.
It was absolute dream project to be able to spend so much time in India and so much time, reading, because it's the book. I was months and months and months and months reading in the library. It's so much history. I learned so much, but it's such an incredible place to travel. But it was absolute. It's for sure, of all my books, it's for sure my favorite one to have worked on, and I'm most excited about. I'm really excited to be able to, that's published in India and coming on the book tour next month. Is going to be really exciting to be able to interact with people there and to kind of share that, because I think it's one of the greatest heritage items that India has, and I think that needs to be appreciated. I mean, it's completely unique. It doesn't exist, anywhere else in the world. And this is something that it needs to be extremely proud of. And I would love to see Darjeeling even more popular than it already is.
Sure. And on a parting note, if you have a message about LitFestx for our viewers, that'll be great.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.